Hey, how's that? McDonald, your real estate agent here with Real Property Associates. And in today's video, I want to talk about inspection contingencies. First of all, what are they? And then discussing why I think you should have one, or at least have an inspection prior to purchasing your home. Now, the inspection contingency is a pretty common contingency in Washington State, specifically in the Seattle area. Sometimes we find that this inspection is actually done ahead of time, so maybe not contingent on an inspection, but buyers are still getting inspections. So let's define an inspection contingency really quick, and I'm going to define it as this: the agreement, or the purchase and sale agreement, and we'll do another video on that here soon. The purchase and sale agreement or contract is contingent or conditioned on the buyer's subjective approval of an inspection of the property and its improvements. That's essentially what it is. And actually that's pretty much the language on the inspection contingency, so I'm cheating, but that's the best way to describe it, so there's no need to reinvent the wheel. The inspection, now what is an inspection? A home inspection is going to be this. So the inspector is going to look at the mechanical, they're going to look at the structure and the systems in the house, and they're going to mainly focus on the improvements to the property. And they're going to be a generalist, not a specialist, but this is something you as a home buyer will pay for out of your own pocket. In Seattle, it's typically $400 to $500 for a full inspection. If we're going to do a pre-inspection, which I'll talk about later in the video, typically going to be around $300 to $350, something like that. The inspection piece, now during this inspection, the inspector is going to be looking at all the different parts of the house, and they're going to be giving you essentially the clues that they find. Just like an inspector for anything else, they are going to be able to point you towards things that might be issues with the house, and then they're going to recommend that you have further investigation done. Typically that's going to be, making a recommendation to talk to a contractor. So for example, if the plumbing, if there's a leak, or if there's something they see that's not up to code, they're going to recommend that you talk to a licensed plumber to investigate further. And there's varying degrees of issues. Some of these are just deferred maintenance, and some of them are pretty substantial things. And in Washington, it's pretty common in the Seattle area at least to come up against maybe rodents in the attic or the crawl space, or some electrical that's maybe not up to code. Those are pretty common things. But some of them are more serious, some of them are a lot less serious, but the inspector is going to generally point out everything that they see in all the little small details, so that you as the buyer are informed about what you're getting yourself into. The other things maybe you'd investigate during this period are the soil condition, or you might be checking for hazards like lead-based paint, something like that. And there's actually a whole separate addendum for that, which I'll talk about in a different video. But in general here, you're going to be doing your investigating of the property. You might look at building codes and see if there's been additions or remodeling without permits, things like that, so that you really know what you're getting yourself into. And that is the whole point of the inspection contingency, is to protect you as the buyer so that you know what you're getting yourself into. And what's nice is if you can include an inspection contingency in the contract, you're able to do this inspection after you've reached mutual acceptance with a seller, and then you're able to use this potentially as a negotiation tool to get some of the work done or adjust the purchase price, things like that. And we'll talk about that later on in the video. The inspection period typically lasts 10 days. That's the standard, at least on the Northwest multiple listing forms. Now, this period can be shorter, and often is. Typically, what will happen is they'll put in 5 days in the blank there in the inspection contingency, and what that means is that you have 5 business days, so a total of 7 to conduct your inspection. The 10 days, if it's a period of 10 days, it would actually be 10 calendar days, so it's only a few extra days in the end there. But typically speaking, right now we're seeing a little bit shorter inspection contingencies, if there are inspection contingencies at all, which actually is super rare in Seattle right now. So let's talk about this form though. We're going to talk a little bit more about the negotiation process on the back end and how a buyer and seller respond, and then we'll talk about pre-inspections, which I think is generally what you're going to come up against if you're going to be making an offer in the Seattle area anytime soon. So buyer's response. So the buyer has their inspection, and they can respond in a few different ways. The first one is to just say, you know what, I'm good with the house as it is. Let's proceed towards closing. And this does happen relatively often right now in Seattle. It's hard to negotiate with the seller when they can say, oh, I'll just put it back on the market. But if you come with the right things, if you come with some smaller things, and we'll talk about that next, there is still some room for negotiation. But just know sellers have a pretty strong negotiation position in this market and aren't that scared of putting their house back on the market unless there's some pretty major things that come up. Now, the second thing the buyer can do is they can just disapprove the inspection and walk away. And in that case, they would be entitled to retain their earnest money, which I've done videos on in the past. It's essentially your good faith deposit that you make after your contract's accepted. The third response that they can make is to let the seller know that they want to get further inspections. And I mentioned earlier, the inspector is going to look through the house, and they're gonna make, and they always do, recommendations that you pursue some of these things and talk to professionals to get further evaluation. So if at any point one of these items you want to investigate further and we don't have enough time in the contract for the contingency, you actually can get a few additional days. Typically it's another 5 days to investigate further. So you could end up with a total of 15 days on your inspection period. Again, we don't see that super often in Seattle right now, but it is something that we do see in more normal times, and maybe we'll never see that again. And then the last thing that you can do is, as the buyer, is to ask for the seller to either make repairs to the house or to change the terms. So maybe reduce the purchase price or ask for some kind of credit to do some of the work on your own after closing. And I would say it's more common to see purchase price reductions or seller credits, which is essentially usually a purchase price reduction, to offset those issues rather than actually having those done prior to closing. But again, it just depends on the buyers and the sellers and the situation that we're in. So each negotiation on this back end is a little different, but that's just some general insight into that process. Now, the seller can come back then and respond in a few ways themselves. So they can come back and say, okay, we're good to go, I accept these changes. The seller can also come back and say, no, I'm not gonna do any of these changes. The seller can also ask for different changes to be made. So they can say, they can propose an alternative, or they could accept some of the changes and reject other ones. So the seller has also quite a few options on the back end after the buyer's response. And if the seller doesn't accept the buyer's initial response and proposes alternatives or changes, things like that, and the buyer then again has the opportunity to respond, and in that time period we got to come up with some kind of an agreement. And so that's either going to result in a mutual agreement to move forward or a mutual agreement for the contract to be terminated. But in all, this inspection contingency, as long as the buyer and seller are communicating and within the time frames and the timelines given in the contingency, the buyer would be entitled to their earnest money back, generally speaking, in this situation. And that is why you do it. It protects your earnest money and protects your interest as the buyer in the transaction and allows you to really be thorough and do your due diligence. And that's really the biggest reason you would do an inspection. And I mentioned earlier, it's so that you know what you're getting yourself into. And that brings me to the other topic I talked about at the beginning, and that's pre-inspections. Almost done here, bear with me. Pre-inspections are when you do this inspection ahead of time, and it's more of a Happy Meal than it is a Big Mac. We'll do the comparison like that. So an inspector on a pre-inspection is going to do the same inspection, but they're not going to provide you with a full written report, which you would get in the situation that you did a full inspection. And in that inspection, they're still going to do, like I said, everything that they said they were going to do and do all the inspections that you would want, but they're just going to provide it to you in more of an oral format. So you're going to attend that inspection. You're going to get, they call it a pre-offer consultation in some cases, but the idea is still the same, that you know what you're getting yourself into. And as I previously said, in a pre-inspection, there's no negotiating really. You're just getting your knowledge, you're being informed. It's an FYI to you as the buyer, so that when you make your offer's informed on that. Or in some cases, I have clients that'll do a pre-inspection and not make an offer at all. So a few other questions really quick before we wrap up that I get asked a lot. The first question is, can I back out? When can I back out during my inspection period? And the answer is simply before the expiration. So at any point during this period, as long as we're following the timelines, you can back out of the contract and retain your earnest money. The other piece here that I get asked is, can I back out before even doing an inspection? And the answer to that question is yes. You don't necessarily have to have an inspector come do it. You as the buyer can conduct your own inspections. or do your other research. So if you decide before the time frame that you don't want to purchase the house, same thing goes. You can back out of the contract. So I hope this is helpful. This is a little bit of a longer-winded video, but a lot of detail that I hope is valuable for you as a buyer as you're thinking about purchasing a house here in the near future. If you have any questions or want to talk further with me about the home buying process or your specific situation, I'd love to be a resource for you and help in any way that I can. So please don't hesitate to reach out. My contact info is down in the comments below, and you can always just send me a message here on YouTube or Facebook, wherever you're watching this video. Hope you're well. We'll talk soon.